this is Jeff Steiner from Americans in France. And today I am talking with Bill Hinchberger. Bill, are you there?
Yes, I am, Jeff. How are you?
I am fine. And where are you, Bill?
I'm in Paris, actually just a couple blocks outside of Paris near the Bois de Vincennes.
How is it as an American in Paris?
I've lived abroad a lot before, so it's, the expat experience is not new to me. Paris and France have, some of their peculiarities. I lived in Brazil for a long time, so I kind of put things on a sort of continuum between France and Brazil and the United States are the three countries that I've lived in. France is I think out of all the places, kind of the most difficult to adapt to. One of the things is just getting started is there's a lot of bureaucracy. As you sort of segue, if you're coming here, if you've been here as a tourist, go through passport check and you don't really deal with officials again. If you start to live here, you have to deal with a lot of bureaucratic things, and every country does. If you want to live in a foreign country, you're going to go through visa procedures and everything else. But France is, they like to say that the French invented the bureaucracy. So a lot of the hoops that you have to jump through here are, sort of a little bit more involved than, say, when I was in Brazil, in order to do some of the same things. And a lot of the tax, once you start paying taxes here, tax complying with those things are very complicated. There's a lot of little complications related to living in France that maybe you don't have in a lot of other.
You set up a business?
I had a job when I first came here, and when I left that job and decided to stay here, I needed to make a living. And so I went back to running my own business, which I had always done before. In order to, sort of make that happen here and also to facilitate the visa situation, I registered what I considered a company. When I talk to French people, they say it isn't. But it's actually it's a separate entity. It's sort of a bureaucratic, legalistic entity that, technically receives all the money as if it were a business and pays its own taxes and all that sort of thing.
Right, you have the separate entities as opposed to being freelance.
Well, I'm freelance, and in my view, nothing's changed. It's only really the bureaucratic thing. If you were in the United States, you wouldn't need to set up one of these entities to function. Here in France, it's kind of required. Plus, in order to get the visa, I also had to have, some way. I think the French believe that that their country's the best in the world and everybody should want to live here. And, but they don't want you to take their jobs. So basically, if you have a way, especially if you're sort of my background from, North America, they're open to having you come here as long as you can prove that you can, have money to spend or a way to make a living. So I had to set up this entity also for those reasons.
What's it like playing basketball in France?
Basketball is different because unless you go out to the outskirts of town, unless you go out there, you don't really have pickup games the way you have in the States. You can't just show up to a court and start playing and, say, I've got next or whatever. Basically, everything here is organized. So I had to actually join a club. It's a basketball club that actually has a professional team and then, sort of smaller, lower level teams. And then they also have a recreation league. It's not a league. It's just, it ends up being one of the nightly sessions. It ends up being just a pickup game, but you have to be a member to go there. You have to pay dues. You have to have a card. You can only go on a certain day. That's a completely different than in the States.
It's the bureaucracy.
It is. No, I mean, it really is in a sense. And in fact, when my carte de séjour, which is my ID card, is renewed every October basically, and which is in the middle of the season or everything stops here in Paris as well, even the recreation activities. So things only run from September to June. So in October, when my ID card expired and I got a new one, the old one that the basketball club had on file was expired. They sent me a letter and said I had to send them a copy of my new card. I mean, they're connected to that.
You have the wrong card.
It did expire, and I sent them a copy of my new card, which was fine, but the thing is that, why would they care? I mean, what difference does it make? But, that's France.
What are some of the interesting things, or some of the things that you find interesting in a?
I like literature and I like history, so there's opportunities to connect to all of those things here in Paris. If you read in English, there's the American Library, which is well stocked with books in English. There's obviously the local public libraries, which are good. There's a literary movement that I'm interested in called Oulipo. You can relate it to poetry. Poetry, except for free verse, is written according to rules. There's rhyme and, rhythm and metrics and all that kind of stuff for different kinds of poetry. Well, what they've done, what they started out, and the most famous person related to this was Georges Perec. He wrote a book, an entire book without the letter E, and if anybody knows French, to write an entire book without the letter E, and then have the book be about the missing, a detective story about the missing letter E. So basically what they do is they create these kind of restrictions which they claim allows them to, release creative energies in other ways, and forces them into solutions that the restrictions make, just like poetry would. If you have to make certain words rhyme, you have to think of a new word to say what you want to say.
Yeah, my wife had told me about that book.
It's been translated into English as The Void.
Was it easier to move to France, do you think, to adapt as an expat because you had already been one?
Well, it's hard for me to compare myself to, someone who hasn't done it. But I think, yes, obviously having experience dealing with different cultures, and dealing with different cultures not only as a visitor but also as a resident, you are more adaptable. I mean, Americans in general, if we tend to be adaptable, we tend to move a lot. People tend to move even within the states from one state to another and everything very often. So
for somebody who wanted to live in France, would you say Paris is a good place to live?
It depends who you want and where you are in your life. I wouldn't suggest, and this may come as a surprise to some people, I wouldn't suggest Paris. Just to give a brief bit of background about myself, so put it in context. I was in Brazil, married to a Brazilian woman. Unfortunately, she got cancer and passed away, and which was one of the motivating factors for me to move to France. I wasn't looking specifically to move to France, but when an opportunity for this job in Marseille came up, I took it. And then after the job kind of didn't work out, I moved to Paris. And Paris has this reputation of being this romantic city and all that kind of stuff. And I think it is, if you come here with a partner, if you come here on your honeymoon or something, you can go to all those, you can go to the bridge where everybody's got the locks there and, seal your everlasting love. But it's not a great place to be single. There's not kind of the way you would have in a lot of other, or not as much as in other cities, easy ways to meet people. French people tend to get into long-term relationships and stick with them. So if you're coming from the outside, coming into a situation that's not quite as fluid as in some other places. And also I found, and this is one of my pet peeves, as a single man, when I go to bars and clubs and whatever, especially on the weekends at night, often they won't let you in. Whenever I go with a group, or whenever I go, especially a group with a woman, I've never had a problem.
How has it been for you learning French? Just some background. You speak Portuguese and Spanish.
I speak fluent Portuguese and really good Spanish, good enough to work in Spanish. I found French more difficult than those two languages. And part of it is related to the fact that, just because of my own schedule, when I took this job and they wanted me to start really quickly, I wasn't able to study French before I came here. So that was a drawback. But I've also found that different than those two languages, when I learned Spanish and Portuguese, I could understand more than I could say. And with French, it's the opposite. I can say a lot more things than I can actually understand. I can make myself understood, and then people turn around to me and say things, and I'll just kind of shake my head and wonder what's going on. Obviously after a certain amount of time, I'm a lot better, but I still have trouble sometimes with the comprehension side. I've learned 2 other languages, so it's not that I don't know how to learn languages, but it's just a little bit more complicated. The way it's written is not the way you speak it. People kind of run things together. It's a lot more difficult to the comprehension side.
Have the French been helpful?
French people are, you can divide them into different groups. There are lots mass of people who have been really helpful, not only in terms of my French, but in terms of my personal life and whatever. And then there's, other people who are not. I would say, when I put them on a scale between my Brazilian, and American experiences, I think the French would unfortunately on this one go, as a group to the less helpful side in terms of being people oriented and whatever. The Brazilians are all over you, and the Americans will, help you if you ask them, basically. There's a critical mass of people who are extremely nice, extremely helpful, extremely, interested in lending a helping hand. So, I can't really complain on that regard.
What are some of the things you like about France?
One of the things I like about France is one of the things I don't like about France. And so it's interesting because France has this view looking sort of backward view. And if you say it that way, it seems pejorative. But in fact, that's why there's all these great museums. That's why, there's corner bakeries everywhere that are really cool. That's why, they preserve some of their slow food culinary traditions. This kind of backward looking thing is probably one of the most fascinating things about France. And, and then if you're going to ask me what are the things that you don't like, then I'll say the same thing. They're backward-looking views, which, make it difficult to do work, which, inspires the whole bureaucratic thing, which they, invented with Napoleon and everybody, and a lot of other things, of that nature. So, kind of the things that I like and I don't like are flip sides of the same coin in a lot of ways.
What would be your suggestions for somebody who's thinking of coming here or is here already?
Well, first thing I think is if you have the luxury of doing it, to learn a language. Like I say, I was called, on a job where they wanted to fill the position very quickly, and I wasn't able to study the language beforehand. I think if you study the language beforehand, you come out way ahead. Everything else comes sort of as a function of that. That would be my main thing. The other ones are sort of more generic, but that's also a generic one. But, I think moving abroad, there's generic things like, look into all the bureaucratic issues related to visas and related to bank accounts, related to, all the sort of daily grind kind of things that you have to do that, how do you do it? And each person's situation is different. If you're, a young person just out of college, it's going to be different than for a person who's retiring. If you're coming with a job and you have an employer, that's going to be different than somebody who's coming here, maybe wanted to run their own business or be a freelancer or something. So everybody's situation is different, but that information is out there. You can get information that's related to your own specific thing. So I would say learn the language and, do your research.
Bill, well, it's been really good talking with you.
Good talking to you, Jeff, and I admire your work. So, keep up the good work.